Welcome to the second part of our video on the data analysis paper. So in the first part, we discussed the fact that the paper is really divided into three parts. And in this video, we're going to discuss the organization of each of those three parts. Now, we're going to start with part 2, which is describing and discussing the data. Because in reality, when you do a research paper, you normally do the research first and then you write up what you found. And so you've already done the data analysis, and then you're going to do the introduction, which is going to explain what kind of data analysis you did and why you did that data analysis. So we want to look first at the data analysis part. Now, I want to start, I put in this part that I highlighted is not, it could be probably more of a table. It wouldn't be in the text. But this is the question that we're looking at. You're writing a paper and you copy a few words, and do you think this kind of copying is considered plagiarism? Okay, so one of the things first thing you have to do in this part of the paper is you have to explain what is the issue that is in this question. So the issue is how many words are considered plagiarism, or how do you define what plagiarism is. And so in that case, the first thing you have to do is explain exactly what the issue is. And again, notice it could be a couple of things, so you have to explain what issue you're directly addressing. And then once you explain that, you want to start making claims. And we'll just again give you an example of a claim. And in this claim, we say that the students were divided equally between considering, or almost equally, between those who consider plagiarism copying a few words and those who do not consider a few words not to be plagiarism. Okay, so that's my claim, that there's not a uniformity in their answers. Now, I want the data is going to support my claim. And so a plurality say that copying any words is plagiarism. However, almost as many, and again, notice that I'm trying to compare the two sets of data here in order to support the claim that there's not a lot of difference. And so 95 think one way, 82 think another way. And so it tries to show that there's not, a great deal of difference in the opinions. And then even a third opinion, which is a little lower, so I use the expression as somewhat lower, felt that it mattered if the words were important. So again, the data shows that there's a great deal of division among the students as to what is considered plagiarism. So, and then the final part of this discussion of the claim is, and I think this is the most important part, is your explanation of what the claim means. And that's the discussion. So this is your opinion. So the data should be very objective, but now you're becoming a little more subjective. So you can say there wasn't a clear-cut definition, and you can then start explaining why do you think is this the case? Or why is this important to teachers, or why is this important to the university, depending on how you're writing the paper. But this is an expression of your opinion. So now we can go back to the first part of the paper, the introduction. And we've talked in discussing other papers about the parts of an introduction, that what you're writing in the introduction is an analysis of a problem that your data is going to address. So let's say, for example, that here the problem is the difficulty of defining plagiarism, and this is difficult, and therefore it's difficult for students to know whether they plagiarize or not. So in the beginning of the paper, usually the first sentence, you explain two things. What exactly is the topic? And secondly, why that topic is important. So you want to make it clear to the reader what the paper is about and why the reader should be reading your paper, since it's so interesting. Then you need to have somewhere in the introduction analysis of the problem. And you remember a problem analysis is the difference or the gap between the goal and the current state. So let's say the goal is you want students to have a clear understanding of plagiarism, but the reality is that you found that students often are confused about what the definition of plagiarism is. So that's your contradiction. And notice I almost always try to use the word however. You don't have to have a contradiction, but it's very useful. Now, once you state the problem, there are two other aspects of the problem you need to address. And one is, again, why is this problem important? So, for example, it's important because it causes students to plagiarize. And if they plagiarize, they can get in trouble. And you can go on trying to develop this importance. And the second thing to address, which is also important, is what is the cause of the problem? Now, the cause is important because you might want to suggest a solution, and the solution has to match the cause. So the cause might be they weren't taught correctly, and the solution may be they need to be taught, something like that. But again, you lay out what is your criteria here for judging the effectiveness of your solutions. Now, the third thing you need in the introduction is some discussion of the research. And unfortunately, the way I laid this out, 1, 2, 3, it looks like they're separate, but they're integrated with each other. So, for example, if you say it's important, and somebody else has discussed, that you've read has discussed the importance, then it's a good idea to cite that person. If you say that students haven't been taught, then it's a good idea to find someone who said students haven't been taught. And again, if you can't think of why it's important, then you have to find somebody else who's already thought about this. And then you explain why you agree. So as we've been discussing, there's a variety of reasons you use this research, you cite this research, not just to show that you're not plagiarizing yourself, but to show that you have support for the claims that you're making and your analysis of those claims, and that you're a widely read person, and therefore, you're someone who we can trust. And then the final point, which usually does come at the end, although it doesn't have to, is a one-sentence statement here. What is the paper going to be about? So you're going to be talking here, for example, about student attitudes towards the number of words being plagiarized. Now, the final part of your paper is the conclusion. And we would like you to think about the conclusion as if you were writing a blog. That is, you're expressing your own opinion. So in a research paper, the conclusion is the most subjective part of the paper. It's where you give your own opinions. Maybe you have some basis for those opinions, but maybe they're just things you've been thinking of. Now, you'll often see, I admit, in research papers, summaries. This paper particularly is very short, and in a short paper, you don't need to summarize. If you must feel you need to summarize, you might begin the conclusion with one sentence, but for this, you don't even need that. Now, the most important thing you have to say in the conclusion is why your research is important. You have to be able to express that you're doing significant research, that the research is making a significant contribution to the field. You can also discuss what policies, so as we mentioned before, if you were talking about the fact that students maybe have never been taught about plagiarism, you might want to talk about how they should be taught. Or you might want to talk about how the university should handle plagiarism, because this kind of problem could lead students into trouble. So you can discuss policies. And you can discuss other research that might be done. Remember, research is meant to create other opportunities for research. So sometimes this is a good place if there's something limited in your study or something you don't feel comfortable with, that you express that and then maybe show how you're going to do more research in order to correct it, because you haven't solved the problem yet. So if you haven't solved the problem, there's going to be more opportunities for you to solve the problem. So again, if you have any questions on this assignment, please contact